Hey, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. I'm sure I've probably got the possibilities covered there. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at IIBA. We are joined today by two fantastic speakers. They've got a podcast. Maybe you've seen them at a conference, but they really do capture the need for visual communication in the work that we do. So, Grant Wright and Paddy Dhanda in the Superman shirt there. Um, Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys to introduce yourselves. So, we are recording today's session. You will get a link to the recording and a link to the slide deck 24 hours after today's session. And then I think you'll probably get like a follow-up email with some additional content about, this topic. You're already using chat. We love it when you talk with us and also talk with each other. So please stay active over there. I think we're going to have time for a little bit of Q&A maybe today as well. So if you've got questions, you can put that into the Q&A box. And we love reactions and we've got them turned on. So feel free to use those because the speaker can see the reactions. All right. Our topic again today, Art of Persuasion, Transforming Stakeholder Engagement with Storytelling. And I am going to turn it over to Paddy and Grant to introduce themselves.
Oh, thank you so much, Suzanne. And yeah, it's such a pleasure to be presenting on this webinar. I think Susan was telling me we've had over 2,000 people register, so we're honored. And I know 2,000 won't join probably, but still, everyone that's here, thank you so much for sparing the next hour to listen to us and hopefully engage with other members in the community. So today we're going to be talking about the art of persuasion and just why it's so important and is a superpower for business analysts. Quick intro about myself. So I come from the city of the Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, and my background is very much business analysis. So moved into business analysis from a software role, and over the years have moved more into sort of agile ways of working, product ownership. I would say the best way to describe my role at the moment is sort of product management, product director at the UK's largest technology training company. So it's been a real journey, and a big passion of mine is visual thinking, and that's how I met this old man over here next to me. Sorry, I didn't say old, did I, Grant? I'm really sorry about that.
You might have accidentally said that, yeah, Paddy. Yeah, it's my fault because I haven't shaved, and so my grey beard shows up more. So, hi everyone. My name's Grant, and I'm originally from Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. Hence the accent you might not fully understand, but I will do my best to speak slowly and clearly and enunciate as well as I can, because if I speak the way I was brought up, you probably wouldn't understand me. So I'll try my best. I currently live in Bridgnorth in a place called Shropshire in the UK. So it's about an hour from where Paddy is in Birmingham. And a very similar background to Paddy. My background is in business analysis. I've set up my own consultancy firm, and on the back of that, I've kind of branched into service design, business architecture, and other related disciplines that all revolve around solving problems and creating clarity for my stakeholders. And for me, visual thinking is just a fantastic way of creating clarity, whether you're trying to solve problems or, in the case of what we're talking about today, you're trying to explain or present something to somebody. Paddy, back to you.
Yeah, next slide.
Malfunction. Need input.
Input. All right, right. You got it. Okay. This is a picture of an aardvark. See that? It's an aardvark. It's a mammal.
Input. Aardvark. Abyssinia. Adam, John, Adam, John, Adam.
Holy crow! You can read.
Input. More input.
Okay, no problem. Volume 2, no problem.
More input, Stephanie. More.
There isn't any more. You've read everything in the house.
Welcome to Generation Z. At one time, this was thought of as science fiction, but I'm sure in today's fast-paced world, we see this all the time, especially with the way AI is going. And if we think about content and information, just how much information we're being bombarded with, we've created more information in the last 10 years than all the years before that. And research shows that people talk faster now than they did in the 1950s. People living in cities, on average, are walking 10% faster than they did 20 years ago. And so in a really fast-paced world that we live in, we need to be able to make people care about what we're saying, because people's attention spans are shrinking and speed is of the essence. And what we're going to be really focusing on today is exploring the art of visual storytelling and how it can help persuade and influence people. Now, I would ask if you've ever given a presentation, but I'm sure I'll get 580 people saying yes. Now, when we think about presentations, they don't have to be those formal presentations that we all think about. I'm sure we give presentations in lots of different ways. For example, if you're ever going for an interview, you're having to present yourself to the other person. Sometimes we have to give sales pitches, and that requires a presentation. Maybe as a BA, you're explaining something complex, and that requires presenting in a certain way. Maybe at team briefings or company meetings. And we don't always have to use slides, but very often presentations involve PowerPoint and slideware. And we've all probably experienced bad presentations. So I'm going to ask you two questions. So first of all, what makes a presentation rock? I'd love to hear or see in the chat what people come up with. What makes presentations great? What's that ingredients that we need? Oh, lots coming in. Visuals, engagement, data, images. Oh my God, they're flashing past so fast. Entertainment, memorable, storytelling, color, information, data. Lots of people saying humor. Yes. I think we're going to fail on that one, Grant. Relatable, repetition, illustrations. Look at that. Someone says it needs Paddy. Oh, that's my best friend.
There's no need for sarcasm on this webinar. There's no need for that.
I have paid a few people to say good things about me today. So thank you so much. Now, what makes a presentation suck? I'm sure you can think of lots of obvious things. Probably a lot of the reverse of what you've just said there, but I'm sure there's other things as well. So I saw someone boring, too much text to read, reading from the slides, too much data, too much information. Yes, lots on there. Dry presentations. Oh my God. Monotone voice, too much data, no conclusion. Yeah, that's a really good one. Brilliant. Brilliant. We should steal some of these, Grant, and I think we might use them in the next presentation. No Q&A. All right, let's not fail on that one. So, talking about too much text, he says, there we go. So this is a real slide. It came from a good friend of ours, he's Ben Carruthers, who's a thought leader and an author in the world of visual thinking. And he posted this on LinkedIn. Now, he was talking about just how disengaged he became when he saw this slide. Now, if you read it carefully, it's got some great information in there, but our first reaction is very much to disengage with this information because it doesn't really have anything compelling about it, apart from probably the emoji, which we added on later. And so as BAs, we can have the best ideas ever, but if we can't communicate them in a way that makes people care, then our ideas will never take flight, just like this sad little bulb. And it's a bit like cooking. You can have the best ingredients, but if you don't know how to bring them all together in the right way and create that gourmet meal, then I'm afraid no one's going to like your food. And that's probably me, because I'm the worst cook in the world. And so in order to give a presentation, a great presentation, we believe you need three key things. You need a compelling message, visuals that reinforce your message and amplify, and you need to be able to deliver that message to your audience in an engaging way. So we're going to continue with our cooking analogy. Now, imagine you're going out for a meal, and the way to think of the message is almost like the taste of the food. It's really the core of a good meal. And without this, you'll never really enjoy the experience. Next, we have the visuals. And this is really about how the food's presented on the plate. If the chef just dumped all the food into a little pile, I'm sure that would have an impact on our perception of the food. We might think it's not so great. And then finally, the delivery of the food. Again, if the waiter comes along and they give you a bad experience, they're not looking very happy, and they're not delivering that food in an engaging way, again, that has a big impact on the way we experience the service. And we don't have time to explore all three of these today. That's probably going to be a whole couple of days worth of conversation. But what we're going to focus on today is the message, because we believe the message is really the core aspect of any presentation.
But before we can create a compelling message, we first need to think about who our audience is. Without understanding the need of our audience, we run the risk of talking about what we know as presenters, which may not be what our audience actually needs. So you need to think about who your audience is. What's their context? Why are they here? Why are they at the presentation? What do they need from you? And a good way to think of this is to try and complete the following sentence. After this presentation, the audience will ... And in that ... we want to think about how will the audience feel? How will they act? What will they know? Now, just a word of caution when we talk about what will they know, because as I mentioned before, if we just talk about what we think they need to know, that may not actually connect. So we need to dig deeper and think, why do we believe our audience needs to understand this? And as BAs, we should be well versed at asking why and exploring more deeply what is it that the audience's underlying need is. Because what we want to do is we want to move away from simply informing our audience to transforming them in some way. Because most presentations, if you think about it, involve some kind of change. You're trying to transform your audience in some way. So, for example, you might need to take a solution proposal to maybe some kind of design authority, and people might be unclear about what the problem is that we're even trying to solve. And your job is to try and bring them that clarity as to what the problem is and how we're going to move forward. Or maybe you're working on a project and you're delivering some software into a particular business unit, and you need to communicate to the impacted teams what the change means for them. Again, you need to transform that audience from potentially being naysayers or suspicious of the change to being supporters and even advocates that will champion the change for you. Or maybe, like Paddy said before, you're presenting to try and sell something, and you want to move your audience from an awareness maybe of your company and your product to a willingness, a propensity to purchase whatever it is you're selling. So the point is, in all cases, your audience is being transformed in some way, and they need to have a reason to care. You need to think about, what are your audience's burning needs? What problems are you trying to solve? And what change do you want your audience to go through? Now, once we're clear on who our audience is, we need to get more focused on, well, what's our message? What's the big idea? What's the one key point that we want our audience to remember? And you can think about your core message a bit like an elevator pitch. I'm sure you've all heard the idea of an elevator pitch, where you have the time it takes to ride on the elevator to get across your point. But going back to Paddy's introduction about all of the information overload around us and the world of kind of data and social media, a good way of thinking of it is like a tweet. Yeah, I'm probably talking about the old Twitter limits rather than X nowadays, but you used to have 280 characters to be able to communicate what you wanted to say in a tweet. And that's a really good kind of way of thinking of it. You've got about 70 words to say, this is what I'm trying to say, and this is why you should care. Another useful way that Paddy and I have talked about is something called the Golden Circle from Simon Sinek's book, Starting with Why. I don't know if anybody of you have come across that one, but the context of that book is more about leadership and how great leaders communicate inside out when they're talking about the Golden Circle. So they start with why and how, and then that appeals to our limbic brain. It's the part of the brain that controls trust and decision making. So you might refer to that as your gut. You're following your gut. You're actually following your limbic brain. And once you've established why something's important and how it can benefit the audience, then you can start to talk about the what, the practical, analytical, logical aspects that back up what you're saying. But it's really difficult to connect with an audience when you just talk about the what without explaining why, without passing through and initiating their limbic brain. So the why in this case is the underlying motivation for your audience. Why should they care about what you're saying? The how is your proposal, your solution to the audience's problem that we're trying to solve. And then what becomes practically, what should they do? What steps are you hoping they'll go away and take on the back of what you're telling them? And if we focus on our presentations and explanations from a starting with why perspective, then that means that our audience are more likely to kind of buy into what we're saying. So Paddy and I put this to the test. I don't know if we mentioned, but Paddy and I co-founded a meetup community called the Visual Jam back in, was it August 2020, wasn't it? Paddy was the first one. It was during lockdown. We wanted to have a face-to-face meetup for visual thinkers, and then COVID came along and scuppered our plans. And so we launched an online meetup event, and that's now grown to a community of over 3,000 people from all over the world. And when we were thinking about how we would explain this community to other people, we tried to use this kind of this format. So if we look at this this kind of structure of kind of starting with why, rather than just talking about the Visual Jam community and what it is, we start with talking about the context of why does the Visual Jam exist? And for us, that's about, as Susan was saying at the start of the session, our belief that we can unlock creative potential that helps us connect better with other humans and ultimately improves the way we work. It can make such a difference. The how then taps into, well, the Visual Jam allows people to learn by leveraging the power of visual thinking from people that are really well versed in that, the best in the business. And then the what, if we were pitching the Visual Jam, would be more practical, talking about, well, what do we want you to do? We want you to come along and join our free community, head to thevisualjam.com. So that's the kind of one way of formulating your headline message that is tapped into kind of why the audience cares and connects with what you're trying to tell them.
And next, we're going to explore the power of stories. And stories have been used to pass information from one generation to the next. And so way before people could read and write, our ancestors used stories to explain how the world works. So it's something that's really ingrained into our DNA. Oh, too far. There we go. You're on mute. Hey. So, but the real power of stories is how they help to create an emotional connection. But why is that important? Well, without some form of emotional connection to what we're saying, people are less likely to be persuaded by our ideas. And so we're going to put this to the test now and see if we can illustrate the power of connection. So if there are any budding entrepreneurs on the call, we're going to tell you some golden nuggets that I think are going to make you millions. So please do bear us in mind when you become the next Elon Musk of the world. Talking about money there, not anything else. So in 2009, journalist Rob Walker and his colleague Joshua Glenn, they ran this social experiment where they wanted to see the power of storytelling. It was called Significant Objects. During the experiment, they went out and purchased 100 items. Those 100 items cost them around $129 in total. And then they listed them on eBay. But instead of using standard descriptions about each item, they swapped those with stories that had been written by creative writers who they had commissioned. And these writers agreed to take part in this experiment. So, question for everyone. Here's an egg whisk. How much do you think this egg whisk is worth? What would you pay for this cute little egg whisk? Oh, Sam's a bit harsh, said $5. I started with 5.
Going down, it's 99 cents there.
Oh no, wow. Poor egg whisk. Oh, we got $15 there. That's pretty good.
Depends on how much I needed it, says Erica. Fair enough.
Is that 1 pence? I think Carrie was saying a pence. Right. Okay. Oh, we got a $20 there. Wow. Nice. Okay.
10 pesos. I don't know what the currency conversion is on all these, but it's not very much, right?
So in this example, they had a writer, Sari Cunningham, who wrote a small little story. It was crafted about a man who had just had a heart bypass. And the man loved to make extravagant 10-egg omelets. And he made these omelets for his lovers. And because of eating so many of these eggs and these omelets, he had really high cholesterol. And he had to have surgery. Now, the story's told from the perspective of his wife because she describes his infidelity, and she writes the story and explains how she ended up then packing her bags to leave him. And on her way out, she took this egg whisk as a souvenir. Now, we're going to ask you again. If we go on, that's it. So they actually bought this egg whisk for 25 cents. Now, based on that story, can I ask you once again, how much would you pay for this egg whisk? Has that $1 gone any higher?
It's gone down.
Priceless. There we go. Stace says priceless. Someone said less. Counterfeit Canadian dollars. I didn't know BAs were such criminals. Oh my God. Anyway. Love it. Love it. Okay. I could spend all day looking at what people type on this one. However, the final price was actually $30. Someone who wasn't a BA paid $30 for this egg whisk following that story. Suckers. Anyway, so if we think about all of those objects, they purchased them for $129. But how much do we think they sold the entire collection of objects? So they paid $129, and each one of them had a story like this. What do you think they totaled in terms of the money? There we go. We've got some guesses.
We should probably explain, Paddy, that the actual story was way better than you told it then, right?
All right. Well, there is that, folks.
You actually made the value go down with the way you told the story.
Oh dear. Yeah, it's about delivery of the message, right? That's what we were talking about earlier. So I failed miserably on that one. But look, we've got lots of guesses here. We've got 1,500, 500, $4,000, 1,000. Lots of different currencies. I don't know how much that equates to, but and Ada says 12,000. Well, let's see how much these sold for. They actually sold for $8,000, and you can see the percentage increase there. It's almost 3,000%. Patrick almost fell off his chair because he says, "No way, daylight robbery." But it just goes to show the power of story. When we connect that story with a product, it can completely change the value of that thing. And this is where emotional connection really plays a part, because emotional connection leads to emotional investment. And if we go to the next slide, that emotional investment leads to an increased perceived value. So we start to value those things much more when we hear that backstory about them. And that emotional connection and investment, it makes people less critical, less objective when the story is told well. And it's a great secret lever to help persuade your audience as well. Should we put this to the test?
Yeah, let's tell a little story. So I'm going to tell you a little story about emotional investment from my own personal experience. So this scruffy little character you see on the screen is my daughter Scarlett's favourite bear, Little Nell. And when Scarlett was 5 years old, she went shopping with her nan and bought this scruffy looking koala bear from a local charity shop in Bridgnorth, the town where I live. And she christened her Little Nell. And she brought home Little Nell and introduced her to the family. And I wasn't sure I'm not sure how hygienic this koala was, but she took Little Nell everywhere with her. I mean, everywhere. We went on holiday. Little Nell came with us. She went to a birthday party. Little Nell came along as well. She accompanied Little Nell. When Scarlett was, I want to say, about 6 years old, something like that, we found out that she had a hearing problem. And when we saw the doctors about it and they investigated, they told us that she had perforated eardrums. And so what they needed to do was to give her an operation to do a skin graft to essentially block the hole in her ear. And to do that, she had to go under general anesthetic and she had to be put to sleep. And, as a parent, it's the worst thing. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but when your child has to go through an operation and, they're scared about what's going to happen, it's a horrible thing. But luckily for Scarlett, Little Nell was there with her to accompany her to the hospital and look after her during the treatment. And when Scarlett's baby sister was born, my youngest daughter, Saffron, Little Nell was there to keep baby Saffron entertained. Now, I'm deliberately dragging out the explanation to make the point that Little Nell was a big part of Scarlett's life and our lives. Fast forward a few years, and every year in Bridgnorth, we have a town carnival. So Bridgnorth is an old town with an old castle ruin at the top of a hill, and then there's a railway that goes down the hill to what we call Low Town, and you have the River Severn and the steam railway. It's a beautiful place, and the procession goes from High Town down to Low Town, and they have floats and different things going on, and it all ends in a kind of a fairground down in Low Town. So in this particular year, Scarlett was part of the profession, as was my daughter Talia, who's the one in white there, the carnival princess that year. So Scarlett was taking part with her cheerleading squad. So Scarlett is She was, at the time, she was the flyer. So I don't know if anybody knows much about cheerleading, but the flyer is the one that gets thrown up in the air. And as a parent, watching your child get thrown up in the air and hoping other children catch them is a horrifying experience. And they were doing this on the tarmac, walking down the street, throwing her up in the air. But Scarlett was so excited, and she wanted to bring little Nell to join in the fun. So little Nell came along to the carnival. We went through the procession. It went down to Lowtown, and Scarlett went off with her friends to get some candy floss, go on some fair rides, while we had a couple of cheeky drinks while we were waiting. And you can maybe guess where this is going. There's lots of people around. There's lots of distractions. And Scarlett comes up to her mum. She pulls on her skirt and says, Mum, I can't find little Nell anywhere. And she looks horrified. And we're like, well, where did you leave her last? Have you seen her anywhere? She's like, I don't know where I've put her. I've got no idea. And so then we're going around to people. Have you seen a koala bear anywhere? And they're like, we live in Bridge North. We don't have koala bears. I'm like, no, it's a cuddly toy. Have you seen this cuddly toy? And honestly, it was so frustrating. And at that point, if somebody had turned around to me and popped a ransom note through my door and said, give me £1,000 or the koala gets it, I'd have probably paid it to get little Nell back. She meant that much to Scarlett. But luckily, there is a happy ending. Thanks to the power of social media, my wife posted on the local community group, explained, put a photo of little Nell up there, and little Nell, I think it was the next morning, was reunited with Scarlett. Now, Scarlett is she's nearly 18. She's 18 this month, actually. And even now, little Nell still takes pride of place on her bookshelf next to the picture there of her and her best friend. So after all this time, little Nell is still a massive part of her story. Now, by telling this story, I'm starting to make some form of emotional connection with you, probably. You're finding out a bit more about me personally. It's not just the usual work stuff. But I'm going to hand back to Paddy a little bit now to talk about why that's the case and what it means.
Grant, you've just made Yulia cry, she said in the chat. So, yeah, that's just mean. Anyway, so in his famous TED Talk, The Magical Science of Storytelling, David J.P. Phillips talks about when storytelling is done well, we can create what he calls the angel's cocktail. It's got nothing to do with alcohol, but this is where we can change certain hormones and chemicals in the brain to actually get our audience to think in a different way and feel this emotion. So the first one there is dopamine. And this is where, if we're telling a story, we can create suspense, we can create a cliffhanger, we can pause and create waiting. And this leads to increased focus, motivation, and people start to remember more when we increase someone's dopamine levels. So, question to you, Grant, in your story, how did you try to increase dopamine in our brains?
So probably the biggest point there was when little Nell goes missing and we're wondering, will we get little Nell back? And I think at that point, if I'd have just stopped the story, there'd have been a few frustrated people saying, well, but what happened to little Nell? That's the idea of creating that cliffhanger, that suspense. You want a resolution to the story.
Nice. And then the next one is oxytocin. And oxytocin is where we start to create empathy and connection. And what that does is it starts to create this trust and bonding. And we can even get people to be more generous as well. So again, in your story, Grant, how did you try to elevate this particular chemical in the brain?
Well, I think, as I said at the end of the story, I kind of just shared a bit of myself and my personal life, and it just helps break down those barriers. So, talking about how worried I was about Scarlett's operation, and about kind of how important it was. I was willing to pay £1,000 to get back that bear. Those things kind of people can empathize with that. They understand it, they connect with it.
Brilliant. And then finally, endorphins. Now, this is where we can generate humor, laughter, and this really gets our audience to relax and, again, get more focused. And also, we can spark some creativity in our audience as well. So again, in this story of yours, how did you instill some of that humor?
Well, I always say when we talk about this point, Paddy, it's not about cracking jokes and stand-up comedy, because we'd have no chance, right? This is about just injecting a bit of light-hearted humour. So the reveal of little Nell in hospital with a gas mask is just a nice, humorous kind of thing. I joked about the ransom note. I've talked about my daughter being too cool for teddy bears, and just little things like that. It doesn't have to be stand-up comedy, but just a little bit of humour. It relaxes people, and they lean into what you're saying.
Brilliant. And before I go into the next part, I saw a question in the chat, which was like, how do you relate this to business? And I just wanted to pick that up very quickly, but we'll focus more on it later on. You know, we always hear now that people buy from people and not from logos. And organizations do this all the time. They connect with us at an emotional level. You know, when you see a Nike advert, for example, and there are other well-known sports brands out there, but they connect with you emotionally. They show you the possibilities of using that product, how it can change your life, all of the amazing things you can do. But they're really sparking all those different emotions in our minds. And similarly, we can do that at work when we're presenting requirements or we're presenting designs. If we focus on how it's going to change the lives of the users, there's a real deep human connection that we can create, rather than just talking about process flows and data flow diagrams and all that good stuff. Anyway, next slide. And so equally, David J.P. Phillips talks about what he calls a devil's cocktail. Now, this is the stuff that isn't so good. So these chemicals can actually do damage if you spark too much of this in a conversation or a talk. So cortisol and adrenaline are seen as startling. They can really startle you. They can bombard you with, if you bombard someone with too much information. And this leads to intolerance, and it can impair your decision making. Now, the best way I can explain this is, because some people might say, well, adrenaline is good. Well, if you ever watched a horror film and you see that build up to that moment when the other person jumps out of the closet and really scares the other person. Imagine if we were presenting right now and we did something that startled you. I'm sure that would create a negative reaction, even though your adrenaline is super high. So when storytelling is done well, we can induce these different hormones in the minds of our audience. And equally, if we spark some of these chemicals, it can have that negative impact on your audience as well. So use them wisely is probably the key message there.
So we've explored there why storytelling is useful. It helps us tap into people emotionally, and that starts to help us to connect and persuade. But let's talk briefly about what's the structure of a good story. So there are lots of variations of storytelling models out there. The one you see on the screen here is one that was created by Gustav Freytag. He was a 19th century novelist from Germany. And he analysed the common elements of plots in stories and novels of his time. And he came up with this pyramid that showed us that, there is a kind of an opening, a beginning part. There's some kind of inciting, triggering incident that leads to rising action, some form of climax, and then there's kind of that resolution and kind of a new kind of status quo, I suppose, that comes out of that. Another one that's maybe a little more famous, some people have probably heard of it, is The Hero's Journey. So it was popularized by Joseph Campbell in 1949, but it kind of had a bit of a reboot in 2007 when Christopher Vogler kind of adapted it and brought it kind of into a more modern language. But it follows a similar structure. You can see at the opening of the hero's journey, they're starting off in the world as it is today, and then there's a interaction that gets to the point where they cross some kind of threshold, that kind of inciting incident, and then they go through a series of trials and challenges and ordeals, and they come out of the other side with some kind of new learning, some kind of outcome that's improved them in some way. And Richard, you clocked it in the chat before I even revealed the next slide. Star Wars. So it's true. This is an excerpt from a book called Resonate by Nancy Duarte. But the fact that she quotes in that book is that George Lucas, when he came up with the storyline for the original Star Wars Episode 4 movie, he actually rewrote and resequenced the order of that script to literally follow the 12-step hero's journey. It was such a compelling story. I think if you look at Harry Potter as well, it almost maps on perfectly, certainly the first movie. So yeah, absolutely a proven mechanism of kind of creating engaging stories that keep us hooked. But Paddy and I, we're simple people. We like to keep things simple. And I think that the Pixar story spine is just nice and straightforward. It was developed by Ken Adams, who worked at Pixar at the time. And it starts off in the way we all recognize. Once upon a time, something happened. Every day, this kind of usual state of affairs took place until one day we have an inciting incident. That maps pretty perfectly onto Act 1 of the hero's journey. Then you've got a series of trials and challenges. Because of that, this happened, the other happened, the other happened. And then you get to Act 3 until finally you've got your resolution. And ever since then, you've got this outcome, this new learning. So, you see this in so many of the Pixar movies. If anybody's seen The Incredibles, if you were to ask, well, what's The Incredibles about? People might say, oh, it's about like superheroes fighting bad guys. But actually, if you've seen the film, at the start, Mr. Incredible's in a dead-end job. He's miserable. He's feels unfulfilled. And then he goes through a series of trials and challenges with his family, and he comes out the other side of it having reclaimed his identity and reformed the bond with his family. So, there's always that kind of positive outcome and moral that comes out of the story when Pixar gets involved. But I couldn't resist testing this with one of my all-time favorite films, Back to the Future. So if you're too young to have seen Back to the Future, apologies, please indulge me. But, when we talk about the sections in that story spine, those, if I just go back very quickly, those 7 or 8 points there, they refer to them in Pixar as what they call story beats, like a drum beat. They're the key points, they're the headlines that summarize the essence of the story. So when you're thinking about telling a story in whatever context it is, what you can do is you can describe and distill your story into these beats, which is what I tried to do with Back to the Future. Now, there's a lot going on in Back to the Future, so I did my best, but you can see, it fits. Though once upon a time you had a teenager back in 1985 who was friends with a crazy scientist. He would spend all the time with his family who were miserable, unfulfilled, unhappy at work, until one day, the triggering incident, the Doc creates a time machine and he ends up getting transported back to 1955. Then we're into Act 2. Because of this, Marty meets up with his parents when he goes back in time. He accidentally causes his mother to fall in love with him. So then he's got to work out a way of unpicking that. Otherwise he won't exist anymore. And so he has to befriend his father to help his father stand up to the school bully to then win his mum's heart back. Keeping up? So, but that at a high level, that's pretty much what happens to get to until finally he sorts all that out. Doc Brown helps him harness a bolt of lightning that gives him the power to get back to the future. And when he gets back to the future, his family's new and improved. They're all much more happier and fulfilled because of the events of the past. So you can see how you can just sort of summarize the essence of the story and the main points in this kind of story beat structure, which is what I'm trying to demonstrate there. Now, when we apply storytelling to our presentations or our explanations, we need to bear in mind that the audience is the hero of our journey. You're the mentor as the presenter, guiding them through that journey. So sticking with our Back to the Future theme, as the presenter, you're not the hero. You're not Marty McFly. You're Doc Brown. You're helping the audience, who is Marty, get what they want and understand things and come out of your presentation with that new understanding. You know, and if you're not a Back to the Future person, then you're Yoda or you're Gandalf or Dumbledore, or pick your mentor. I suppose that's the point. And I think that one really great way of kind of summarizing that, Phil Wakenell, who's the author of Business Presentation Revolution, says, it's not your presentation, it's theirs. And I think that's always stuck with me. Remember, the presentation needs to be for your audience. You need to think about it from their perspective. It sounds obvious, but it's really powerful. And there's been a few comments in the chat about how would you apply some of this to business, right? Because we're not going to go in and tell stories about Little Nell in the middle of a corporate meeting, or maybe we would. It depends on your audience. But I think the point is it's about what can we learn from storytelling structures. So we're not telling stories in that theatrical sense. We're not necessarily using the hero's journey, but we do need to take our audience on an engaging journey when we present. So again, I mentioned Nancy Duarte's book, Resonate, before. In that same book, she talks about something that she calls a spark line. And what she did was she analysed the greatest speeches and presentations of our time. And she, you know, from Martin Luther King Jr. to Ronald Reagan to there was all sorts of presentations and speeches that she analysed. And what she found is what they all have in common is they all frame the problem, if you like. The bottom grey block of this diagram is, this is the world as we are today, or here's the opportunity we're missing. Doesn't matter which way you do it, but they set the scene, and then they make a series of points contrasting how things are now and how things that could be, whilst also using contrast in style, in pace, in the way they present, those kind of things. And they throw in stories, anecdotes, facts. They mix up how they're getting their points across until they result in a final climax, our Act 3. Having told you all that, this is the big thing that we want you to remember. And that's the big kind of new bliss, the new understanding you want your audience, the transformation you want to have them to have experienced. And so when Paddy and I were preparing for this presentation, we thought we'd have a go at this. We talked about what we might say in our presentation. We played around with the Post-it notes. We tested it for contrast, and we were making the right number of points and how we were going to vary our presentation style. And I think in a moment, what Paddy's going to do for us is he's going to demonstrate how he's going to leave you with a fantastic, memorable conclusion that reinforces our core message of this talk. So no pressure, Paddy, on that one. But just before I hand over to Paddy for that fantastic ending, just want you to remember that when we're preparing for a presentation, what we don't want to do is go straight into PowerPoint and hit new slide deck. Because if we do, we get this by default. We get boring bullet points. I think we all concluded when Paddy said what sucks about presentations is bullet points and too many words. So what we want to do is we want you to think about this and go analog, like Paddy and I did with the PowerPoint, with the Post-it notes for this PowerPoint. Get out your Post-its, your Sharpies, or whatever works for you, and think through your ideas, whether that's in text or sketches of what the thumbnails of your slide images could be, and use them to refine and organize the structure of your presentation. And we could go, way deeper into how you go about doing that structure and how you break things down. And that's probably a workshop in its own right. But unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our talk. So we'll leave it there that that don't, resist the urge to jump straight to the slide deck, particularly if it's an important presentation where you need to actually land and connect with your audience and change their minds in some way.
Thanks, Grant. Now, there's some research from a lady called Gloria Mark. She's a leading researcher when it comes to attention spans. And what she found is that the average person's attention span is just 47 seconds. So if there's one thing you take away from here today, it's about making people care. Because if you don't grab them within those first 47 seconds, you've lost them for the entire presentation. And if you do that, and you understand your audience, and you get clear on your core message, and you create that great emotional connection through storytelling, using those story structures, using the contrast as well, we can create interest and engagement. And then, just maybe, your ideas will take flight. Ta-da, there we go.
Did I terribly miss my cue there, Paddy? Sorry.
There you go. He ruined my ending. So I'm not taking the blame for that. So folks, thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you enjoyed some of those insights. By the way, all of our slides, we've hand drawn them. So we tried to minimize stock images wherever we could, apart from some of these. And we often get asked about how do we put our slides together. In this presentation, we didn't use so many animations, but for other presentations we've done at conferences, at BA conferences, people have often asked us, how do you do those animations? Because we've really started to explore the possibilities within PowerPoint, because we feel a lot of us don't use some of those amazing features that it has. So we decided to put on a mini course, and if anyone's interested, we're going to run it on the 9th of December. It's a 2-hour session, and we literally share all of our tips and tricks that we know about PowerPoint and how you can create amazing slides. If you do scan the QR code, you'll see there's a mini video we've embedded into the listing, and it gives you an example of some of the things that we've created with PowerPoint. It's like creating a cinematic experience. So if you're interested in that, then please do come and join us. We've put on an early bird offer. We couldn't make it any more cheaper, to be honest. This has taken us probably a good year to pull together. So we try to make it really affordable. So just for the first couple of weeks, it's going to be at £49. Then it's going to go back up to £99. So that's just a quick plug there. And then we'll finish off on the last slide. So thank you so much, folks. We will be sharing the slides. So, you will have those. But yeah, equally, please connect with us. I think I did put our LinkedIn links as well in the chat. I'll do them again. And then we'd love to hear from you. But I think we've got a time for a little bit of Q&A, Susan.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes. So just as a reminder, we do have questions in there. So thanks for putting those in. I've got upvoting turned on. So if you see a question and you have the same question, give it an upvote. Or if you have a question and you don't see it there, just add it. So let's do a most upvotes. Okay, no upvotes just yet, so we'll take the first one on the list. Dan asked, how do you take advantage of storytelling and visuals if the client does not have the budget and desire for a system to visualize their data, like Splunk or Tableau?
Oh, okay. So this is talking about how we visualize data to tell a story. Yeah. I mean, I think in the context we were talking about, you can use visual storytelling in any context, but when we talk about data specifically, quite often when we're presenting data, we show the full graph, we show everything, right? And we're expecting our audience to draw the conclusion from that. And it's not about trying to sway your audience or just sort of deceive them in some way, but what you can do is pick out the key message that's trying to tell you. You can highlight a segment of the data and make it really important, or you can have a visual that gets across the point about your data, what it's trying to say. And in some instances, it can be simple as saying the key statistic, the key point is that the volume of traffic coming in through our contact center is this, and then drawing a parallel or to a metaphor of some kind that explains that's like this much stuff going on. So, when people talk about that's like the length of 3 football fields, when they talk about something big, it's to try and connect you to a metaphor that you understand. So I don't know if it quite answers that question about if you don't have the budget to visualize the data, but what I would do is I'd look for the message you're trying to get out of that data and think about the best way of explaining that.
I'll add to that. We've had a couple of a data scientist and a data governance expert, and whenever they've talked about storytelling in the context of what they do, they have talked about bringing forward whatever that data is and then telling a specific story that illustrates that instance. So, finding something strange in your data and saying, well, I went on site and I asked the customer experience team, and they told me about a time when, and they could clearly articulate this story that made sense of that data. So sometimes you don't even need, like, the data visualizations just tells you what the data is, but that story can be that hook into people going, oh, I understand why that's a problem or that's an opportunity.
100%.
So thanks, Stan. That's a great question. Let's see. Oh my goodness, this question has 20 upvotes and it's also from Dan. What do you recommend for a business analyst that needs to influence people and handle stakeholders but lacks the small talk skills and is not a good speaker?
Shall I jump in with something?
Yeah, sure.
So I'll give you an example. When I was a lot younger, I had a dream to work for IBM, and I remember applying for a job and I didn't get it, and I was so disappointed because I had my heart set on joining that particular organization. Then years later, there was another opportunity for me to apply, and I got invited for one of those assessment days where, as you know, they're very stressful. And I was always very rubbish at those group activities where they get you to work in a group on a challenge. And something magical happened. And I think that's when I really discovered the power of visual thinking and facilitation. Because what I did was I noticed all these smart people were talking about the problem and the solution, but nobody was actually noting anything down or facilitating. And I simply picked up the pen, and I'm a massive introvert, by the way, believe it or not. So I picked up the pen and I just started to note down some of the things that had been said quietly in the corner. And then halfway through, somebody turned around and they said, oh, you've captured everything that we've been talking about. And it just goes to show the power of the pen, really. I mean, you don't have to be a big extrovert presenting in front of lots of people and, trying to come out of that comfort zone if you're not comfortable with that. Sometimes something as simple as just drawing something visual that people then can debate and they can then help refine. And you can actually do that in silence at times. So I think, it is a superpower to be able to kind of facilitate and use some of these skills in a way. And then if you've got storytelling, then a great way to then summarize maybe the message. That would be my take on it anyway.
I see a lot of people in the chat are talking about Toastmasters. I think I've not done it, but I'm aware of it, and certainly heard it's a great way of kind of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. I mean, from my personal perspective, I was painfully shy as a child, and not the most confident public speaker in my career. But I think a combination of getting older and caring less what people think about me has been a blessing, but also I think presentation and storytelling is definitely a skill that you can learn. And if you focus on your core message and how you want to deliver it, and then you have to practice and know your stuff. And I think that slickness just comes with confidence because you know your message. If you turn up kind of not prepared and then you're challenged on the spot and you don't really know your stuff, you'll get exposed and it'll make you more nervous. So I think nothing substitutes for just being well prepared when you're talking about a topic.
The way that you get good at small talk and storytelling is you have to do it. There's not a boot camp where you can go. You actually have to do it and just do it a lot. Again, to gain confidence, also to figure out what your style is. because everybody's style of small talk and storytelling is a little bit different. And so you got to get out there and do it. It's kind of the answer. All right. Well, that is it. We're actually at the end of our time. Unbelievably, right? It's gone so fast, but you've got, man, lots of great chats. The chats keep coming in. We had lots of great questions. Maybe I'll connect with you guys and see if we can't answer some more of these questions a different way. If you are interested in doing that. Well, Paddy and Grant, I want to thank you for joining us today and for everybody that joined us. Thanks for giving us an hour of your time today, especially those of you that have joined us for the very first time for an IIBA webinar. I sure hope we see you again. There's more of this that we do. So, all right. Thanks, you guys. We'll see each other soon.
Thank you.
Thanks
Yeah,
all.
take care.